Thank you, Professor Srinivas, for sharing your valuable insights with us. I would now request Dr. Ipsita Roy, who is present online with us, to present her views to the symposium. Ipsita ma'am, please.
Yes, Rajni, thank you. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Unfortunately, could not be there physically, but I'm very happy to be here presenting my views on this interesting symposium. But first of all, thank you, Professor Reddy, and the entire team of DST-CPR for organizing the symposium, and also congratulations on the new center. I have worked at the DST Center at IIT Delhi previously. So I'm really happy to see this new center which has been set up at the University of Hyderabad. So I understand that what I'll do is I have a presentation. I will keep it short. Much of the presentation that I have in terms of the introductory part of it has already been covered by Professor Haribabu and Professor Srinivas. So I'll just go through them briefly, but I'll keep it short. So I'll try to keep the presentation short. Just let me know if I can if my screen is visible. Is it visible? Is my screen visible to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Okay, so I'll start off by talking about just very briefly talking about my own background in STI and innovation literature. And my background is mainly economics. So what I'll do is I'll try to fit this topic STIs in formal institutions from the perspective of innovation economics, and that is where my expertise lie. And I'll just keep this particular outline by very briefly giving you the context. I'll then talk a little bit about the innovation systems, and then some context about India's STI landscape, and then particularly then coming to STI in research institutions and academic institutions with respect to challenges and opportunities. So I'll keep the outline of the presentation. Now, I'll not go too much into detail of what we study in innovation economics, except that we typically look at the process of innovation and we try to understand what is the impact of innovation on the economy at large. Now, in order to understand the economic effect, we look into different aspects of economic well-being, productivity growth, GDP growth, employment, profits, wages, income inequality, and so on. So, idea is for us to understand how investment in innovation, investment in science and technology comes up in terms of productivity growth or any term of economic indicator. Now, there is a significant variation when we are looking into these effects. There is significant variation across regions and countries and sectors, different growth trajectories of countries, different business cycles or phases of business cycle, industrial dynamics, and it's very, very different across these different levels of aggregation. So idea is for us to understand what is the direct impact of innovation on the broader economy, on the macroeconomy, but also to understand the nuances of innovation and how it affects or how it plays out within the disaggregated level as well. And I will come back to what Professor Srinivas has mentioned about in my future slides. I'll come back to what he has mentioned about regions in a little bit. Now, just to sum up or give a summary of what we are talking about or what are the broad components of innovation, I have just basically put this you know elements of innovation in terms of supply side, demand side, then there is this network component, and then there is policy. Within supply side, or which is also called technology push, we have many elements in terms of input side or input areas of innovation: R&D, science, education, knowledge management, organizational routines and capabilities. So everything that goes into the supply side of innovation can be clubbed into the first quadrant. Then we have the demand side, which is typically how innovation is generated through market demand, through consumer preferences, through any kind of demand which is evolving out of how the world is demanding that particular product and processes and services and so on. So this particular component is called demand pull innovation. Then we have networks, which is gradually and very rapidly becoming a very major component of our STI ecosystem. And this is where we talk about networks. Now, networks can be in terms of it can take various forms in terms of collaboration, strategic alliances, technology transfer, joint research projects, public-private partnerships, S&T parks, as has been mentioned previously as well, foreign R&D centers, multinational corporations, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, we have policy. So policy can be any types of policy, any type of incentives that have gone into, any type of subsidies that have gone into, and policies can be macroeconomic, microeconomic, regional, sectoral, any type of, as well global as well, any type of interventions by the public, by the government. Now, I will not talk anything about the innovation systems because it has been discussed already. I have also talked a little bit about the triple helix model, the quadruple helix model, the quintuple helix models, the different components of the systems. Key systems or the key components are, of course, government, academia, and industry. And then there are all these other institutions and other elements with respect to finance, support institutions, entrepreneurs, and so on and so forth. So that part is already there. Uh, these institutions and all these different elements of an innovation system has its specific roles. Now, of course, because the particular presentation is on research and academic institutions, I have highlighted that part in much more detail. But of course, there are also other pressing actions and roles of these different elements of the entire innovation ecosystem, or the innovation system as it is called. And all of them interact in order to produce innovation, and in order to contribute to the STI landscape of any country, really. So we have the role of research institutions in terms of research, basic research, as repositories and absorption and storage of knowledge, in terms of spillovers and knowledge transfers, in terms of, again, IPR, intellectual property rights, academic spin-offs, technology transfer offices, and networks. Then we have the private sector, government sector. We also have financial institutions and entrepreneurship, support institutions, and informal institutions, and which, of course, I understand that will be part of the second session on informal institutions. So all of these institutions and the actors bring in or let's say contribute to the STI landscape that we have in a country. And in the interactions and the linkages between these actors are crucial for actual effective innovation, productivity, or any kind of economic performance for that matter. So some trends and some scenarios on how it looks like. Again, this is something which has been mentioned previously, how the R&D looks like. And evidently R&D has been, even though we have the absolute number of R&D has grown, as a percentage of GDP it has gone down. And it's something which has been, the pattern has been since the last 30-40 years. So this is the pattern, and at the moment we have about 0.6 to 0.7% of GERD as percentage of GDP. Now, with respect to where it's sectoral, distribution of R&D, of course, central government and the state government, they are the major chunk of R&D that we have, and the private sector accounts for 36%, 8% by higher education sector. So again, this has been also discussed before. So these are the common patterns that we have. With respect to universities, we do have a rising universities. There has been a significant upward trend in universities, colleges, autonomous institutions. Majority of the universities, 58% of universities, are public funded, but colleges have been the majority of colleges, according to 2021-22, they are private funded. And there is also significant regional variation and concentration across geography, across regions in India. And this is with respect to commercialization of research in terms of publications and in terms of patents. Again, if you just look at the trends here, they will show overall there has been a rising trend of research publications and patent applications. And all of these data, so some of the data are taken from the NSTMI's database, and some we have calculated in our own research. What I would like to highlight is the geographical concentration, and that is something which I think which has also come up from my research, and which has also come up in terms of where we should focus our STI policies, and where we should actually focus any kind of elements or any kind of actors that we're talking about. And I think regional aggregation or regional concentration of any element of STI is very key here. So in my research, I actually look into these aspects of how these the different actors, take universities, take R&D institutions, take firms, multinational corporations, startups, how they're concentrated across geography. And Professor Srinivas has mentioned this with respect to US, that there is significant regional variation. And in India, we also have that. So what I'm showing you here is just with respect to universities. So to year 2000 and then 2020, and you do see a significant variation across regions as well. If you look at research output, so before you have seen the general trend of research output and academic patenting or patenting activities, in terms of regions, you do also see a lot of variation. So as you can see, the western and southwestern states have done significantly well in terms of research output, and also academic patenting, and there is a lot of variation. So when we are actually talking about STI, and when we're talking about policy making, definitely we need to have a very very broad roadmap of of what are the to do in terms of policies and STI policies at the national level. But I think talking about these regional variation, because we do talk about industry variation but not regional variation as much in STI yet. So talking about STI and talking about how regions also vary with respect to the landscape, that is also very crucial. So I'm not showing you all the graphs with respect to startups, and with all the elements of or the actors of STI, you can see significant regional variation. Now, some challenges and opportunities that I would like to talk a little bit about with respect to STI in academia, which is the focus of this particular symposium here. And these are the standard, the discussion on what are the major challenges at the institutional level, at the academician level. We keep on talking about funding issues. We keep on talking about the IPR regime. It can be better. We talk about infrastructural, bottlenecks, regulatory bottlenecks, lack of entrepreneurial culture. The STI ecosystem, even though we need a network of STI ecosystem, it is still fragmented in parts. So these are some of the challenges at an institutional level. And then academic level, definitely there are challenges with respect to where we are talking about with respect to career development based on publication. So one of the criteria for publication, one of the development criteria for career development is publications. And there is not sufficient incentives when we are talking about commercialization of research and collaboration and so on and so forth. Generally, the conflict between financial and non-financial rewards and so on. However, from a social science perspective, I want to talk a little bit about what we understand by commercialization, because the term commercialization is very new to social science. It is not something that we have been using for a very long period of time. And when we talk about commercialization, it is not something that we directly associate with profit or money or industry. In social science, because it's a relatively new concept, I think the the term commercialization needs to be also reframed, and um, it needs to also re-evolve. So what I'm basically showing you here is that, on one hand, of course, we have the commercialization component, which is the traditional commercialization measures of funding and IPR and academia industry interface, entrepreneurship, startups. But I think bringing impact within commercialization is also very key here. If I'm talking about from my experience, let's say, policy research is not something which is still mainstream, especially when we are talking about social sciences. So DST, for example, has started this since 2017, 2016 in terms of postdoctoral fellowship, which I was the first cohort with the postdoctoral fellowship of DST. And what DST was at that time, DST was concentrating on was bringing in social scientists within this STI landscape, which is still relatively new here. So when we are talking about commercialization, when we are talking about STI landscape, I think it is also important for us to understand the difference between commercialization and impact. So that is number one thing: policy research with social science focus. The second thing which I would want to mention is that in my work and in my experience with say science and technology parks and universities and STPs, they have been involved with a lot of community engagement. They have been associated with capacity building and empowerment, in especially at the regional level. I think that needs to be included when we are actually measuring commercialization. So just not measuring commercialization by the standard measures of commercialization, but also looking at the impact. So impact of policy research, for example. So I think that becomes quite relevant because social science traditionally is not associated with STI, and that needs to bring in terms of what kind of what we are talking about, what kind of responsibilities, corporate responsibilities are firms engaging with in universities, what kind of capacity building are being taken up by universities, um, and so on and so forth. Um, so, in terms of perspective, I have some comments on the NIS, the National Innovation Perspective, on a national level. So, when we are talking about commercialization on a national level, of course, there are several things there are several prospects of universities and academic institutions. Uh, Basically, building local communities, basically building linkages with local institutions. Funding is there. Talk about project funding, talk about program funding, talk about consultancy projects in social science is not something that we talk about. We are mainly talking about research projects, but consultancy projects, which are mainly building linkages with industries, those are something which are quite relevant. So those kind of things, CSR activities, building regional collaborations, they are also quite relevant. And I do also personally think that engaging with industry already at a level of research, at a very prior level, is very much important. And I do particularly think that industry visits and industry collaboration at the doctoral level, at least in the start of doctoral level, can be an important step towards larger commercialization of research in the future. So that is something which also builds contact and builds networks and so on and so forth. So that becomes quite relevant. And I'll end with my focus on regions, because this is something which I really feel that we need to talk more about regional differences in formal institutions. And it becomes important when we talk about states. We talk about how the role of states may vary depending on the criteria of the state, the inherent positives and negatives of a particular state in building STI landscape. And the last point which I want to make is that even though it's something which is not part of this particular session, is uh, grassroots innovation and frugal innovation, inclusive innovation. When we are talking about innovation, we are mainly talking about mainstream innovation, formal innovation. But there is a big chunk of innovation which are not registered or not documented in the general, in the very regular policy documents when we are talking about it. So I think that needs to be very much uh, highlighted in terms of what kind of informal institutions are there, what kind of other types of innovation are being done, and so on and so forth. And then streamlining data. I think this is something which most of us who have been working in this area, we have faced significantly streamlining the STI data in order to actually capture the challenges or what are the prospects of commercialization in formal institutions. First thing first is we need to understand and analyze actually the data that is available to us. So yeah, I think that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ipsita Roy, for your valuable insights.